welcome to Moscow, Russia. Welcome to Yandex.
Thank you. Hello.
It's so great to have you with us. Do you hear us well?
Yeah, no problem.
Let's begin. Beautiful. First, congratulations with Empire of Sin.
Thank you.
Do you still feel the magic of releasing a game?
Oh yeah. Especially because it's been, it takes years to make one and finally release it, and it's great to hear what people have to say about it.
But what is the most magical moment in the whole production and releasing a game?
That happens actually a lot of times while you're making it. Like making the game is the most exciting part, because you see it changing, and sometimes really cool stuff happens, and you have a lot of those magic moments, during development.
Beautiful. We already have a question out of the chat from our viewers, which is, by the way, if you want to say hello to 1,000 people that are with us online, just do it right now.
Hey everybody, how's it going? This is John.
It's nice to have you, John. This is really amazing. I cannot believe this is happening. So the first question out of the chat: which game out of all the games you've produced do you enjoy the most?
It's between Doom and Quake. They're both really fun games. I play Quake Deathmatch, a bit. And I really like to play Doom Deathmatch. I actually go around the world playing Doom Deathmatch. So it's tough to choose. They're both really fun to play.
Nice. Thank you. So our next question is about Apple II. In the 80s, you bought Apple II. Why did you get this particular computer? And also, the next question is, what computers of those times did you also use, except for Apple II?
Well, back then, I mostly used the Apple II. At the very beginning, before I got an Apple II, I used mainframe at the local university when I was 11. And then it was, really Atari 800 and the Commodore 64 a little bit. But most of the time I spent on the Apple II, like 99.9% of the time was on the Apple II Plus until 1985, and then it was an Apple IIe until 1987, and then it was, I'll say 1988, then it was an Apple II GS, and I switched to the PC in 89.
89. Wow. So we're going back into history, really. So in the 80s and 90s, you worked on Apple II, then C64, then Next computers. Which machines do you remember the most out of the 80s and 90s? Which ones do you really cherish?
Well, definitely Apple II more than anything. It was a really great computer. It was built to be open architecture, so you could just take the top off of it and plug cards into it and make it do really cool things. As a programmer, you had access to memory through a thing called the monitor, which is built into the computer, so you could just get down into memory and do assembly language and look at what's in there. And the other computers really didn't have that built in, and they didn't have it accessible on the inside either. So the Apple II was just, I guess, a super hobbyist computer more than a game computer. But it had tons and tons of games on it, and it actually had a lot of the games that created the genres that we are playing today.
It was actually my next question. Which of the games of those times really inspired you? So are there any mechanics that you saw in somebody else's games that you later used in yours?
Well, I was inspired by, pretty much all the games I played. There were so many games, and there was so much creativity. There was at the very beginning, there was a lot of copying of arcade games that were, actually out there physically. But then computer games started to kind of create their own style, and that was also really fun. So games back then that were really cool, were games like Choplifter and Load Runner and Droll, let's say Swashbuckler, Aztec, uh, Karateka, Prince of Persia. There were like unbelievable amounts of games back then, thousands.
Wow. There's another question from the chat. How did the process of game production change since the 90s? And can you use the approach that you used in the 90s right now?
Yeah, you can still use the same. Basically, even in the 80s, at the beginning of the industry, like the computer game industry kind of started in 1977 when the first three home computers were released, the Apple II and the TRS-80 and the Commodore PET. And those three computers started everything. And that's when computer stores started opening up and started selling software, and some of that stuff was games. The way that you would develop back then was like one person would develop a game. So the person that made the game was a person who came up with the idea. They drew all the pictures, they created all the sound, they programmed the whole thing, they designed it, they sometimes even packaged it. And nowadays, the same thing happens when you're a lot of times if you're just making a game for mobile or an indie game that you can put on itch.io, you do the same thing. You come up with all the stuff, and sometimes you'll get other people to make the art. Now that there's the internet and there's an easy way to move information around, people can just do that. Get some help that way. But then teams of software developers kind of started in the mid 80s. A little mid to late 80s. And for the first time, I worked on a team in 1990. So I had already been making games for like 10 years without a team. But teams have gotten a lot bigger. So back then you didn't have a ton of management, but now when you have teams of 100 people plus, you have to have a lot of different people in management over different disciplines, and just to make sure that production runs smoothly. But it's just gotten bigger.
But do I understand that games back then were developed more as a hobby than something professional, or am I totally wrong? Because hundreds of people that are producing games right now are doing it mostly as business.
It's the exact same. Back then, it was a business. I mean, you have publishers like Broderbund or Sierra or Big Five, Sirius, you name it, and they are publishing dozens of games a year. And it's a business. And the people programming those games, they would spend a ton of time on them as well. When Nasser wrote 9 games in 1981, it wasn't because he did it as a hobby. You don't make 9 games in a year as a hobby. So there were people who were hobbyists, but there were also people who turned it into a profession even in the early 80s when it started.
Right. We do notice the arcade machine in the back. And also guys from the chat are asking if it's working. Does it work? do you still use
it? Street Fighter 2 and Pac-Man. They're plugged in.
Nice. Can you show it to us? I mean, without the camera, but maybe.
It's hard to see. It would be hard to see from this angle, but I could just turn on the screen if you want to see.
Yeah, we want to make sure that it's working.
Okay.
Wow, I cannot imagine having a machine like that at home. This is and you can play it anytime you want. And plus, you have that supercomputer of yours that you can also play, and it's amazing.
I have a Mac Pro, and I have a PC. So I have two computers. The Mac Pro is the big desktop, the big tower Mac,
right?
And then the PC is it's a big PC.
Nice. Our friends from the chat are also asking about your first impression about PC when you first got the first PC. Could you believe it would be so big later in the day?
Well, when in 1989, the reason why I switched from the Apple II to the PC is because it was the big computer. The 8-bit era had basically died. Like everything was starting to kind of shut down at the end of the 80s. So all the old 8-bit computers were, and unfortunately the Atari ST and the Amiga were kind of caught in the middle between the 16-bit era and the 8-bit era. And the PC was continually, improving year after year with faster chips and more memory and all that, and a lot of different manufacturers creating them. Back in the day, Leading Edge was a company that used to make a lot of computers before Dell ever happened. So the PC had been getting better for, I think at that time it was 8 years before I switched over to the PC, because the PC came out in August of 1981. So when I got on it, I really didn't want to. I hated the PC, but as a programmer, and that's all you do all day is program, you have to go to where the market is, and the market was on the PC. So I had to basically say goodbye to programming the Apple II every day and learning how to program the PC as fast as I could.
Wow, it's nice to hear a story about somebody being forced into using the PC. Okay.
I was forced into using the PC. The Apple was so much nicer, but the market was on the PC. And it wasn't a horrible machine to use, as long as, my first PC was a 28610. So it was a Tandy 28610. So it was a 10 megahertz 286. And then about a year and a half later, I got a 38633DX, like, a DX33. So, I even worked on a PC Junior for a little bit during that time, which was a horrible computer.
So the chat is exploding with questions about the new series of Doom. What do you think of them?
Oh, I think they're great. Yeah, I love pretty much the most hardcore fast shooter that you can play today. Which is great that they focused on that. As a real a real different. It's a big difference compared to a lot of other shooters. That you have this thing that is so fast, super violent. True to its roots, and still really fun to play.
What do your fans say about your games produced on consoles? Are there any stories about that? Any fun letters you could quote?
Well, not really letters, but people really like the PlayStation version of Doom. It was a really good version that Midway decided to kind of take the original that we made and just go do something really cool with it, with music and colored light and everything in it. Doom 64 was great. It was basically all original, even though we had the same monsters in it. They looked different, better resolution and all new levels and everything. That was a cool version. The Jaguar version of Doom, we actually ported that ourselves in the office because we were excited about the supposed 64-bit processor that was in it. The Super Nintendo version of Doom was interesting because we did not ask anyone to make that version because we didn't think that the Super Nintendo could even do Doom. But one day a cartridge showed up in the mail from a company called Sculptured Software, which had been making amazing Super Nintendo games for years. And Doom ran on the cartridge. It was like, well, I guess we can sell this. This is crazy. So we didn't even ask to have that port made. And the Sega 32X version, a lot of people, that was their first version of Doom. When they were still making the 32X, Sega came to our office, and we had a big pool table in the main room, and they basically put their motherboard on the pool table and got a TV. And, we just used it like a table, and they were showing us the prototype of the 32X, and they had gotten Doom running mostly on it, but it wasn't going as fast as they'd liked. So they wanted to have us look at the code to see if there was anything that we could do to kind of help make it faster. Um, the 3DO version of Doom had live, like all the music was recorded on live instruments. And I think the owner of Art Data, the company that created it, I think that he was like the lead guitarist. And the music was very good. It was probably the best. Back in the 90s, it was the best version of Doom music that you could hear. It was MP3s, and it was played really well. So that soundtrack is probably my favorite Doom soundtrack.
Wow. There's another question in the chat. What are your feelings? How do you feel when somebody else is partitioning your game and you're not taking part in it?
Well, I'm fine with it. I mean, it's been what 20. It's been 25 years, I think, almost since I left id. So I'm used to several companies working on my original games, like Wolfenstein, with Machine Games doing that, and Quake, Champions being the latest one, by Saber, and then id itself making the new versions of Doom. Even back in the 2000s, Gray Matter was creating the Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and you had other people creating parts of the game like Nerve. It was kind of I've been used to it for a while now, so it's not a problem. They usually do a pretty good job.
Do you remember what was the story of removing blood from one of your games? Was it Super Nintendo Wolfenstein 3D or something, where they asked you to remove blood, or how did you feel back then?
Yeah, it was. We, our biz guy Jay was the one that was in contact with Nintendo, and we were making Doom. And right in almost the middle of making Doom, we had to stop working on Doom and get this Super Nintendo version of Wolfenstein made as fast as we could, because we needed to get back to creating Doom. And unfortunately, we had a contract to do that port, but the person that we gave the contract to didn't do anything on it. So we had to take it over and just get it finished. So we were not going to argue over changing blood from red to green, in the Super Nintendo version. We just did it because we were going as fast as we could to make that version of Wolfenstein. And then we kind of got used to if it's going to be in Japan, if it's going to be on a Nintendo game, it needs to be colored green. And I think even in Germany, it might need to be colored green as well.
Do you remember your impression of consoles in the 90s, where they first started developing?
Well, they actually started in the 80s. So, when the first NES came out, I loved it. It was such a great console. Loved Zelda, loved Mario. It was so easy to use. You just slam a cartridge in and press the power button, and there you are. The game works. It was very cool. So, when the Super Nintendo came out and then the Genesis came out, that was when the real console wars heated up in 1991, with Sonic. And, we even had a Neo Geo. So we were playing Strider and Cyberlip and Magician Lord and all kinds of stuff. So we basically were getting everything, even the Lynx Color handheld game console. So we had everything when it came out, and it was cool to see just the evolution and who was there at the beginning. Sega's not even there anymore. It's now it's Microsoft instead of Sega, but still Nintendo, still Sony, since 1995 when they came out with the PlayStation 1. But back in the earliest days, it was Nintendo versus Sega, and then Sony gets into it in 1995. And then when the Xbox came out, then Microsoft gets into it, and Sega drops out after the Dreamcast and or the Saturn. But yeah, I've been watching the whole thing, obviously buying up every console, and people have been used to it for decades now.
John, you're such a positive person, and we would expect that you would be a little bit conservative at some point, but you're not. And you're saying, "Well, this is a nice console. This is fun to see. This is amazing. This is great." And so one of the questions is, how do you feel about your game? I mean, your baby played on everything, like the pregnancy test. A digital pregnancy test, and you can run Doom on it, and phones in the subway, phones everywhere, phones in the buses, and little screens, and still people are playing your game. So you say you're excited.
Yeah, it's great that that we released the source code to Doom so people could continue to play with it in any way they wanted. And the core loop of the renderer in Doom, we have the version that's portable. It's in C, and
Mhm.
that version that's portable is meant to be optimized for whatever the platform is that you're porting it to, or you could just leave it in C if you want. But that's one of the reasons why it can get ported to everything, is because you don't need to use like you can't use the assembly language in it if you're on an ARM chip or something, right? So you just comment out that source and just leave the C version in there, or have fun writing an optimized version for the chip you're on. But we put the source out there. We put all the information out there for people to mod it. It's a game that we basically gave to the fans, and the fans took it and ran with it for decades. So they are still using it as a benchmark. Like, is this a real computer? Because if it doesn't run Doom, it isn't. But I guess if a pregnancy test can run Doom, everything is a real computer.
Right. So one of the other questions is: are you the one who drew the first cover of Doom?
Well, I didn't draw it. I was the model of the Space Marine on the cover of Doom. The illustrator, Don Punchatz, he came to take photos to kind of block out how the action shot should be for the cover. So I was the one who was the model for that. And Don Punchatz is the one who actually drew the illustration. He had been doing it, his whole life. He was really, really good.
Nice. So another question: the gameplay kind of stays the same, but technology goes forward. How do you feel about it? Are there other ways to update the gameplay as well?
Well, there really isn't a reason to. I mean, you just make a new game. Doom is Doom. So, you just keep running it. It's got a it'll have a locked frame rate to whatever frame rate you have your screen set to. Um, and it still feels really good. It's really fun to play. It's super solid. All the timings of everything make the game feel good. And because processors are so fast, you can run it on anything and it'll still be fluid.
So right now we're at the office of Yandex, and I need to ask a couple of programming questions. Do you write
Sure.
any code apart from code for the games?
You mean, well, yeah, the funny thing is, like, when you make games, you have to write tools to make games. Games don't just happen, like games have a lot of data, level data, art data, you name it. There's a ton of other kinds of data, sounds, blah, blah, blah. So you have to write a lot of tools to deal with the data that your game is going to use. And so I've been a tools programmer since the beginning. I've written level editors and data manipulators slash processors. So I've written at least 40 tools for games. In tools like a level editor I wrote once in 1991 was used for 33 games. So and that's just one tool out of like 40 tools. So yeah, you have to write a lot of tools to do data processing and manipulation to make a game. So there's a lot of other programming that goes on outside the game just to make the game. Like even today when you talk about making a game like Empire of Sin, there's so much information that needs to be processed for the game's stats and the items and characters and all that. And a lot of that stuff is on servers, and you have to have data to pull data from the servers turn that data into like JSON files, or Lua tables, so the code itself can use it. So there's a lot of other tools that we had to write to create the city and manipulate the data into something the game could use.
And of course, what is your favorite language of programming?
A language that's super, obviously super versatile is C. So it's nice and simple. Lua's probably my favorite just because it is completely C based. You program it like C, but it gets rid of all of the memory manipulation and detail oriented memory handling that you would have to do in C. And 6502 is also my favorite just because it was the language I needed to learn to make fast games, even if it is really simple.
John, we're here with Oleg, one of the guys who runs the museum of Yandex with all the old machines and everything you programmed at. We have at our museum. Oleg,
Cool.
Any questions to John?
Yes, John, hello. You're very inspired in Apple II computer. And probably you know that a lot of fans of retro computing made ports of Doom for 8-bit machines. Did you ever have an idea to make your own version of Doom for Apple II computer?
I never thought about it, just because to me it would be like, why would I waste my time when so many other people are going to do this? There are versions of Doom for ZX Sinclair,
Yes.
For old computers like that. So it's cool to let other people have that fun. But I never thought, I never have taken Doom and modified it for anything. I usually just make new games.
I see. For example, you told about Lua, and not so long time ago, I saw the port of Doom for Pico 8. It's a fantasy console it's a Lua-based language console.
Yeah, it's called Poom. Yeah, it's really great.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, it looks really good. It's super fast,
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
How often do you play in your own games, or maybe never?
Oh, geez, when we were all in the office before pandemic happened, people played Quake every day during lunch.
Nice.
And then on Thursdays we would play Quake Deathmatch for probably 3 hours, like kind of a tournament. And this happened every single week. And tomorrow I'm going to be playing Quake from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Deathmatch. So I play a lot of Quake.
Wow, this is amazing. At my first real job, at the first office in 2003, I remember we stayed late at night with my colleagues to play Quake. That was amazing, amazing time. We have tons of questions. Like, for example, how did you come up with how monsters look in Doom?
Well, that was basically Adrian who did that. What he needed to know was what kind of attack and like what kind of monsters did we need, and then he came up with the shapes, and then he drew them. And we also Kevin made a couple. I think Kevin made the Pinky Demon. Adrian made the Baron and the Imp.
Did they ever comment
guys
on how they come up with it? Is it their crazy imagination, or was it crazy dreams?
That's
or
their job. Yeah.
Did they just look at each other and come up with?
Well, they would just talk about it and then just make it, and Adrian would he would sketch it out. A lot of times he would sketch the character out on paper really, really nicely. And then he would, back when we were making Doom at the beginning, we created the characters out of clay. So he made a clay model on a wooden, like a little wooden doll. He put the clay all over the outside of the doll and shaped it and everything. And then we put it on a table, and we had a video camera pointed at it, and we would take a picture of it and then rotate the table 1/8 so we could get the rotations. And so he did that for the whole thing, and then he would have to move the arms for the next animation and do the same thing, capturing. And the problem with clay is when you move it, it rips, it tears. So after I think one character or two characters, it was like, forget doing clay. We need to have somebody make these as actual models. So then we had somebody create models for us that we could pose and then capture, and then they have to paint over it and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work. But creating the ideas for them, it was us, basically telling them the kind of model. We need something that floats, and attacks you, like it comes and hits you, or we need something that shoots you from a distance up in the air. And so they would just come up with those ideas, and then create those monsters, and boom, that's we program them.
Wow, but this is so far away from programming. Interesting. How do you feel about Cyberpunk 2077? Did you see it?
I have not played it yet, but some of the people in the office played it, and they were really impressed with it. It's like, what a great vision of an amazing world. It's huge. So everybody has had, a really cool time. They can't wait to spend more time in it.
I can't believe we have so many questions and so little time. But so we did speak about 90s, the 2000s, and now there's the virtual reality, and also the games using virtual reality techniques. How do you feel about those? And
Yeah, I mean, it's another segment, right? It's another way of playing games, and you're playing on a screen, even if it's a wide screen. You're not going to get the full immersion that you would when you're playing a game in VR, like let's say Resident Evil,
Right.
Biohazard, which is terrifying and amazing, to be in that situation and feel like you're really there. So it's cool. It's a different way of playing games, and AR is also another interesting new way of playing games, superimposing something on the real world. It's not a replacement for what people are used to, which is the basic like screen, whether it's in front of a TV set or on your desk, your computer, or even just a mobile game where you're just playing a thing, or on a Switch or something. Those are just these new experiments that people are trying to see what can be done on this new hardware.
So we're here running a festival of retro computing. So let me get back to those questions. For example, what is the most authentic synthesizer for creating music for Doom? Is it Roland SC55 or Sound Blaster, or which device would you recommend?
Definitely the Sound Canvas. The Roland Sound Canvas is what the music was created on. So you're not going to get more real than the thing the music was created on. Just like, for Heretic, I think it was almost the same thing, using a Roland keyboard to create the music, and then it'll get on a computer and be degraded by whatever the technology is on the computer that's playing it, whether it's a AW32 or a Sound Blaster Pro or, whatever FM synth chip you have in there, it's not going to sound as good as a Roland does. For a while there, Sound Blaster Pros had the capability of adding a Roland daughter board onto the card, so you could actually have Sound Blaster digital sound effects and Roland music playing instead of FM synth. So it was, and you would just use general MIDI to talk to the card. So it wasn't like you had to do anything special. And that was probably the best setup for PCs back then, was Sound Blaster with a Roland daughter board plugged in. But yeah, it was the best music is the one obviously on the source system that it was created on.
Is it true that you produced Doom in your garage?
No.
No.
No, we had an office. When we were done with Spear of Destiny in 1992, we moved to the Black Cube in Mesquite, in November of 1992, and that was when we started coming up with the ideas for Doom, and we started programming Doom, in January of 1993. And we were in a real office building finally. We're on the 6th floor, suite 666, and we were there for years, before moving. Probably, geez, 10 years maybe.
Wow. But how did you hang out back then? Because we're also human beings, that are really interested.
Well, we were working all the time. So in 1990, let's say 1990, when we started, we would, as an example of the amount of work, 1990, in August of 90, that was when John and I started working together. We couldn't work on the same game in August because we had to create 2 games in 1 month. So we did that. We made 2 games in 1 month and put them both on a disc, and that disc went out to 50,000 people, which was advertising our new Gamer's Edge disc. And the Gamer's Edge was a product where we had to make a game and release it every 2 months. So we start 2 months later, that thing's on a disc and it's out to a bunch of subscribers. And we did that for, over a year. We made a game per month. And at the same time, we would also make multiple games after, work hours. So we would, that's how we made the first Commander Keen games. We were making games during the day, a game every 2 months. But then we made Commander Keen in less than 3 months, 3 games in less than 3 months, while we're making a game every 2 months. And then in 1991, we did the same thing. It was like these 6 games that we had to make in that year, but we also made 3 more Commander Keen games at the same time to get out for Christmas of 1991. And we finally slowed down in 1992 when we started making Wolfenstein, and that was just our main game and the only game. And we spent 4 months making that. So we started slowing down. Doom was a year. That was like a real big slowdown to make Doom. So we spent a year, 5 people, and then came out with that. So it just progressively got a little bit longer. But hanging out was, like in 1991, there was no hanging out because we basically wake up, go to work from 10 to midnight usually, or 2 in the morning or something like that, and basically go to sleep and come back. And sometimes we would do that on weekends too. That's how we just got our games done. But after that, it was we were just hanging out was just right there at the office, just talking and just listening to music, playing games. We used to play games a lot, but we would just do that right near each other in the office. If we went out, it was like we went out to dinner or lunch or something like that. But we liked hanging around each other, so it's like a band, like a music band. People like to hang out and just spend all their time together.
Okay, so your hanging out is actually real personal relationship with your colleagues. So whenever you're not working, you're just talking, and that's hanging out.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. What do you think is the best soundtrack for Doom 2?
Doom 2, geez. Well, the original was really, really good. It was really pure, simple. It sounded really good on a Roland, and people have taken it and they've, embellished it. They've made it more metal. But the original one, on the PC, definitely was great. Andrew Holschult has remade the soundtracks, and they sound really good as well. But lots of people have done remixes and stuff that sound really cool. But I think that the original, just the pure original version was great because it was in the background. You're playing a game, so the music shouldn't take you away from the game. So the original worked really well while you're playing Doom 2.
Wow. Let me say again, it's so great to have you. Okay, another 100 questions and we'll let you go. So, Doom and Quake are dynamic shooters, but Empire of Sin is something more strategic, more of a strategy. What games do you prefer personally these days?
I play all kinds of games, but I prefer shooters. So the one that I play a lot of is Ghost Recon Breakpoint.
Okay, but as a businessman, where do you see is the most focus right now in game industry?
Geez, it's everywhere. There's so many different kinds of games. Like if it's massive too. Like you could focus on mobile and get in the weeds. Going, is Clash of Clans still, generating this much per year? And is this Candy Crush still performing? And is someone taking them over? Because there's a lot of like Marvel has some really cool puzzle games. There's Magic the Gathering has some like card games, Match 3, you name it. There are so many games making really good money. Like even World of Warcraft, they've been around for 16 years, and in November they released Shadowlands. There's millions of people playing just this one game, and that's just one game out of thousands of games that are out there that people are playing. Apple told me once that this is just like probably a few years ago. They said that every month 20,000 games are put on the App Store in just iOS.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the mothers in the chat says, "Thank you for Dave Dangerous and
Dangerous
fathers
Dave,
too."
yeah.
They're still playing it with their games, with their kids. Do you remember it? Do you still love it?
Oh, of course. I have a new version of Dave that's coming out in an actual physical box. Dangerous Dave is a game that I made in 1988 on the Apple II. And then you remember when I said that John and I had to make a game in 1 month each? That game for me was Dangerous Dave on DOS.
Oh wow!
So I made that game in 1 month, and it was a game that was put out for free, so people could just copy it and give it to each other. It was never, you could not buy Dangerous Dave. There's no way to pay us. There was nothing asking for money. It was out there just to show what kind of games that we were going to be making for Gamer's Edge. It was an advertisement. So that game actually is more popular in India and Pakistan than Doom was. So I have tons of people emailing me from those countries saying, Dave was the first thing that they ever played. It's because in those countries, when they would put together a new computer, they would always install Dangerous Dave on the computer. So everybody had it. But yeah, it was Dangerous Dave is there's like 9 games total,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm putting them all together in one box pretty soon.
That's a beautiful Christmas gift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, another retro question. Do you remember the ideas that you had to drop because of the technology limitations? Like, for example, Icon of Sin. Did you plan it to be like that, or were you limited and you had to drop some of the ideas?
Well, no, the Icon of Sin in Doom 2 was exactly, that's how we wanted to do it. We were finishing the game, and we were thinking, what could we do here that uses what we have already. It wasn't a technology. Well, we didn't have technology we could have probably spent more time and made it a little bit cooler than it was. But there was already so much action happening in that room that the wall that the Icon of Sin was on, doing anything would not have made that gameplay better in that room. So it was good for what it was doing. Quake, the original Quake, we started to work on it in January of 1991, just after we made Commander Keen 1, 2, and 3. And it just wasn't there. The tech wasn't there. We knew the game was supposed to be much cooler than it was turning out to be. So we only worked on it for maybe 2 weeks, and then we just stopped. We were at the same time making another game already. It was called Dangerous Dave and the Haunted Mansion that we were making in January of 1991. And so we were experimenting with Quake, but it just wasn't going to go anywhere. So we just kept on finishing Dave 2.
Nice. Well, here's a little personal question and Soviet history question. So first, are you in contact with John Carmack right now?
I mean, not too much. Last month we messaged a little bit, but we're both doing completely different things, so not too much.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So a couple of quick questions. Do you remember anything about Soviet games like Tetris? Did you enjoy it, or what's your?
Oh yeah, I mean, who didn't play that? That was everywhere. And I've met Alexei. We've known each other for a while.
Do you remember any other
amazing.
Soviet games?
Jeez.
Well, it's not a history exam, but it's just
Stalker,
just a question.
Stalker maybe. Shadow of Chernobyl. There were a lot of when I came to the Cree conference in I think it was February of 2004. I got to see a lot of really cool games. And we basically, Tom Hall was with me, and we gave Stalker the Game of the Year award, even though it wasn't finished.
Yeah.
But everybody knew it was going to be cool.
So, two final questions that we really wanted to ask you. So, you have millions of fans all around the world, and they're probably sending you stuff. What is the most exotic and maybe spooky?
Jeez. Well, somebody had knitted my head. Like it's this big. It's huge. They knitted my head, and then all of the blood was like, red yarn hanging out at the bottom. And somebody else had made a giant key card out of wood that you could then open, and then there were like the Doom Marine was sitting inside the key card. But yeah, we have a whole cabinet, a couple cabinets full of stuff that people send. Lots of people write books about Doom in whatever language, say Turkish language or, whatever. And so people have written a lot of stuff about Doom, made a lot of Doom things. They sell them at Comic-Con, like if you go to a Comic-Con or a conference like that, you'll see people making little things out of beads or little, those I don't know what you call them, those little things that you heat up and they kind of glue together. They make key cards and Doom Guy's head and all kinds of stuff.
That's beautiful. So we also have a battle of retro games, and later in the day we'll ask you to play the winner of the Yandex battle. But if you could say, so for us to wrap up this conversation, we could speak of the museum for another half an hour, but any retro platform you would name, we do have it in the museum. So if our Russian friends want to touch the platforms, they just come to the museum and hang out with Oleg.
Nice.
But any suggestions that you have for producers of retro games these days?
Geez, I think that, trying to take modern game design and bring it back to the 8-bit hardware, because you're just displaying something on the screen and moving characters around. But if you take the ideas that we have today, where design language has really progressed for decades beyond what was done in the 80s, you could make the best game that's ever been on an 8-bit platform by just using, the best programming techniques of the 8-bit machine that you're putting it on, but take modern design and bring it back. That would be pretty cool to see.
John, it is really great to have you. Let me give you some time to just have your coffee before you play the game that's the winner of today's battle. John, thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't ask all the questions, but we did play with the most. Yeah. Это был Джон Ромеро, друзья.
John Romero, friends. You can shout, you can whistle.
Thank you.
Thank you,
and
John.
emits all kinds of sounds.
This was
All right.
amazing. Прикоснуться к легенде.
It was remarkable to touch the legend.